Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News. I am in studio with Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. We are in the heart of Jerusalem, and so much to discuss on this week's edition of Jerusalem Minute. Yesterday morning, Sunday morning at 5 a.m., all of a sudden my phone started exploding with red alert after red alert. And we're used to that because we've had so many red alerts, Hamas firing from Gaza, Hezbollah firing from the north. But this was a little bit different. This was nonstop. It turns out that Hezbollah fired over 230 rockets, missiles, and drones at the state of Israel because a few minutes earlier, Israel preemptively struck over 1,000 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, including rocket launchers, buildings, terrorist infrastructure. And this was to prevent an imminent attack, which was going to take place perhaps just minutes later. So Israel preventing a major attack. They did fire those rockets and drones, but it could have been much, much worse. Alex, tell me about your experience yesterday morning.
Well, you know, waking up also to this barrage, and we had understood that it was probably a matter of days, weeks. We didn't know when the escalation was going to happen, but we've seen steadily an increase in the amount of rockets being fired. And, you know, people are calling this a preemptive attack. I'm not sure that that's the right word to describe the attack. I mean, you don't have a preemptive attack after over 6,800 rockets have already been fired by Hezbollah at Israel. But the question is, why did they do it then? Why did Israel now take this strike? Maybe it's a proactive strike, not a preemptive strike. And I think what's important to understand is that a lot of these rockets, a lot of these missiles are being hidden in silos and houses underground. When they get set to attack, that's when all of a sudden these rockets and missiles come out into the open. And that is the moment right before they're about to strike is at the time when they're the most vulnerable. So Israel was watching very closely. This wasn't what happened on October 7th, where people turned a blind eye to what was cooking right in front of them. Israel had a magnifying glass on the situation in southern Lebanon, watching the movements very closely, utilizing the best intelligence that they had. As soon as these rockets and missiles got placed on their launchers, Israel, with 100 planes, struck in a matter of less than 1 hour, over 1,000 strikes. And you had the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, saying that Israel foiled between 50 to 60% of that attack. And sure enough, you're correct that Hezbollah did fire a few hundred rockets at Israel, mostly at the north. Some damage was done, but it's clear that the damage could have been much, much worse if Israel didn't strike first.
No doubt about it. And unfortunately, we were told yesterday afternoon that an IDF serviceman, part of the Navy, was killed in one of these strikes by Hezbollah. But yes, it could have been much worse. The main target of Hezbollah's Sunday morning attack was likely the Glilot base near Herzliya, the site of Mossad headquarters and various other military intelligence units. So IDF going on the offensive there and making sure that those strategic targets were not taken out. It could have been much, much worse.
And that is actually causing some internal dissent as well, because you had mayors and community leaders in the north saying, oh, wait a second, you know, when Hezbollah is about to fire on Herzliya, on a Mossad base, on Tel Aviv, which was clearly one of the intended targets of the attack, that's when Israel takes a preemptive action. But they've been allowing Hezbollah to pummel the communities, the villages in the north, and you still have over 80,000 residents that have been evacuated, and Hezbollah has even been firing beyond the area that's been evacuated. So you have communities in the Golan Heights, like in Katsrin. A friend of mine is constantly ducking now into bomb shelters. So they've been firing on the north for a long time. Israel's certainly been, I would call it, filing off the capabilities of Hezbollah over the last 10 months. But it wasn't until yesterday that they showed that they were more serious about the Israeli defense.
I think the people in the north have a point, actually. I think they really do. After, as you mentioned, 80,000 people not in their homes and over 6,700 rockets, I think it's valid that they're upset that some sort of attack like this wasn't launched.
And you had Benny Gantz, who was a former member of the War Cabinet, saying that the attack was too little too late. I'm not sure I agree with him. it's ironic that he's the one that's saying that. Now, all of a sudden, he's the man of the people. He was part of the war cabinet. It seemed clear at the time that part of the reason why he pulled out of the war cabinet when he did about 2 months ago was to prevent Israel from taking a more preemptive stance on Hezbollah and escalating the situation into southern Lebanon. And yet now that he's not part of the war cabinet, he's criticizing the government for being too little too late. But I certainly understand the northern residents. Israel's essentially lost its sovereignty in the north. If it's not safe for your residents to live in a place, then you essentially don't control the place. Providing security for the residents is the number one component of the contract between the residents and its government. So Israel has to do more now to further neutralize the threat of Hezbollah and return a sense of stability and security to the residents in the north.
And the question now is, will Hezbollah strike again? Was this only round one of trying to avenge the assassination of Fuad Shukr, the number 2 man for Hezbollah, which Israel took out? It's been about a month now or so. Hezbollah says, no, this is just the beginning. That being said, I saw on social media a lot of the pundits or whatnot actually making fun of the Hezbollah leaders, since essentially they struck and were only able to target a chicken coop.
Yeah, as a chicken coop, that was one of the main targets that there's pictures of on social media.
They're ripping Nasrallah for this.
And I think that it's really important, and people don't understand the culture of honor and shame in the Middle East, and we've talked about this a few times on the program. But it's so important to not only defeat the enemy, but to humiliate the enemy. The way in which Hezbollah will be degraded in the eyes of the Lebanese people, in the eyes of Iran, in the eyes of the entire Middle East, is for them to be degraded culturally, not just degraded militarily. So these types of, and I've seen all kinds of AI pictures and videos of like Nasrallah sitting in a jacuzzi and stuff like that as this is all happening.
Kentucky Fried Chicken images.
Right. So, these pictures of embarrassment are very important, actually, to winning the battle overall. It's not only a military victory. Israel will win the military victory, as Israel's done in Gaza, but you have to degrade them culturally, socially, in order to really establish yourself as being above and stronger than the other party.
Yeah, people have to understand this is the Middle East here, where strength rules and weakness is stomped upon. Let's have a listen here to the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, talking about the fact that more than 6,700 rockets and missiles were fired against Israel by Hezbollah, and that is why Israel decided to act yesterday.
A short while ago, the IDF identified Hezbollah terrorist organization preparing to fire missiles, rockets towards Israeli territory. In a self-defense act to remove these threats, the IDF is striking terror targets in Lebanon from which Hezbollah was planning to launch their attacks on Israeli civilians. This follows more than 6,700 rockets, missiles, and explosive UAVs fired by Hezbollah at Israeli families, homes, and communities since October 8th. Hezbollah will soon fire rockets and possibly missiles and UAVs towards Israeli territory. We will shortly update the Home Front Command defensive guidelines for those in Israel. From right next to the homes of Lebanese civilians in the south of Lebanon, we can see that Hezbollah is preparing to launch an extensive attack on Israel, while endangering the Lebanese civilians. We warn the civilians located in the areas where Hezbollah is operating to move out of harm's way immediately for their own safety. Hezbollah's ongoing aggression risks dragging the people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the whole region into a wider escalation. Israel will not tolerate Hezbollah's attacks on our civilians. We are operating in self-defense from Hezbollah and any other enemy that joins in their attacks against us. And we are ready to do everything we need to defend the people of Israel.
So again, Israel taking these measures as an act of self-defense to remove major threats by Hezbollah, possibly firing thousands of rockets towards both northern and central Israel. And the question now is Iran. Is an Iran strike on the way? Iran, the Revolutionary Guard commander Hossein Salami commented on the possible retaliation against Israel for the killing of Israel Khania, which Israel did not take credit for, stating, "You will hear news soon." He made these statements yesterday following the Hezbollah strike, and now we're waiting. Will Iran attempt another similar style strike in the days ahead?
Well, you have these two most impressive military operations that Israel's conducted since the war began. The first one was on April 13th when Iran launched its first strike. They sent 300 missiles, which included cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and drones from its own territory towards Israel. A very impressive military operation led by Israel, but jointly with the United States and other countries in the region, including Jordan, participating in the operation to prevent a serious strike on Israeli territory. And then yesterday morning, over 100 jets in the span of less than 1 hour, taking out 1,000 targets, over 1,000 targets, and taking out thousands of potential rockets and missiles that were aimed at Israel. So you see here clearly that these attacks, both by Lebanon and by Iran, have not been as nearly as successful as those countries wanted them to be. Israel definitely demonstrating its military superiority, its air superiority over the arsenals, the missile arsenals of Iran and Hezbollah. Hezbollah said that their attack yesterday was in retaliation for the killing of Fuad Shukr, who is the number 2 of Hezbollah, as you mentioned. Iran is saying that they need to retaliate for the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was taken out in an assassination inside Tehran in an Iranian Revolutionary Guard's compound, protected compound, while Haniyeh was attending the swearing-in ceremony, the installation ceremony of the new Iranian president, Pezeshkian. And Iran, we thought they were going to do it maybe 2 weeks ago, and we thought maybe they were going to do it on Tisha B'Av last week. They're saying that they still reserve the right to do it, but clearly they're watching and they're waiting. And yet at the same time, there's some sort of psychological warfare game that's taking place where they're sort of holding Israelis hostage, wondering if and when they're going to attack. But clearly the IDF showing that they are prepared for these attacks and they can do a lot to foil their success.
There were rumors that Hezbollah and Iran possibly would wait to attack after Israel and Hamas perhaps came to some sort of agreement in terms of a ceasefire in Gaza. That was not the case. Hezbollah struck even before an agreement was reached.
The hostage negotiations were going on for a long time, and the Biden administration, I believe they were begging Iran not to attack during the hostage negotiations, but it became clear that this round, which was called the final round of negotiations, maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, that they weren't going anywhere. Hamas was not going to approve. Netanyahu and Israel not going to move off of their demands. And so it's clear that those current negotiations may not produce any kind of ceasefire or release of hostages. And I think that the patience there ran out. And so they did attack. There was also the idea that maybe the Americans were asking Hezbollah, asking Iran, asking Israel to wait until after the Democratic National Convention, which took place last week.
Right.
We can't know exactly what is being asked, what is being agreed upon between all of the parties. I feel like for all of us watching, and that includes you and me, and I would say that we probably have access to more information than other people, but a lot of us are still in the dark about what ultimately are Iran's intentions, what are America's intentions, what are Israel's calculations. And so, we're still all caught like in the middle, watching and reacting and trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and one of the main questions that at least I've been getting over the last 24 hours is how will the Hezbollah strike impact those ceasefire negotiations and, hostage exchange? Report this morning that there was no agreement over the weekend in Cairo. Hamas saying they do not accept the terms which Israel put in front of them, namely that Israel will maintain a constant military presence in the Philadelphia corridor along the Egypt-Gaza border, along with the Netzarim corridor in central Gaza, in order to prevent arms smuggling from Egypt, in order to prevent weapons from moving south to north. So as of right now, for what I understand, the Israeli delegation's back home. There are other side negotiations taking place. But again, I'm not really crazy about the question, but people are asking it. How will the Hezbollah strike impact what's going on with Hamas? And again, we have to remember the end game here. The end game is Iran is on the path towards nuclear weapons. Okay, that is the end game, and that is the most important thing that I think needs to be discussed. And people are overlooking it, and they keep tying Hezbollah's strike to the ceasefire negotiations. But there's so much more at stake here when Iran is trying to develop a nuclear weapon to wipe out the state of Israel. And even if things calm down, even if there's a ceasefire agreement and things are quiet for a while, it's only a short-term quiet as Iran heads towards nuclear weapons. I think we have to remember that.
Yeah, that's an important point. That, a ceasefire does not mean a permanent ceasefire. It doesn't mean an end to all hostilities. A ceasefire is not a peace treaty. Not that a peace treaty itself can't be broken in this region. Peace treaties can be broken, but we're not even talking about a peace treaty. You're talking about a ceasefire. And in Arabic, the word for ceasefire is a hudna. And a hudna specifically means a temporary cessation of violence, which would give Hamas, in this case, the opportunity to restock, to recuperate, and to get ready for the next round of attack. Remember, we had a ceasefire in Israel on October 6th. And that was a ceasefire that was reached 2 years ago in 2021, and that ceasefire followed another ceasefire that we had in 2014. A ceasefire is it just means an end to this round. If we get to a ceasefire, that's not the end of the war. That's the end of this round of hostilities.
And with Hezbollah, we had a ceasefire since 2006.
Right, and that ceasefire, which is important to discuss, has been violated nonstop.
Right,
like the terms of that ceasefire were never maintained. You had this UN organization, UNIFIL, which was supposed to prevent Hezbollah from having any presence south of the Litani River, which is a natural borderline, not the border that Israel currently has with Lebanon, which is an unnatural border. The Litani River is actually much more natural border, and it's, by the way, important for Israel to have natural borders. But UNIFIL, this UN agency, was supposed to prevent Hezbollah from operating south of the Litani River near the Israeli border, and certainly to stop any military buildup. But from day one, Hezbollah was there, and UNIFIL did not fulfill its mandate. It's UNIFIL. It's true to their name. They didn't fulfill their mandate, and that is the reason why. Like when you get into a ceasefire situation, the only party that's bound by the ceasefire is Israel. Right? Israel doesn't violate its ceasefires, but the other side will violate every condition of the ceasefire, and they will attack when they're ready. That said, these ceasefire negotiations do tie into the larger war. If Hezbollah, and this is Iran, Hezbollah is Iran's largest proxy. If Iran decided that they wanted a cessation of the violence, that they wanted to stop, they wanted to rebuild both in southern Lebanon as well as in Gaza, they could push Hamas, who's their smaller terror proxy, to come to a ceasefire agreement, release some hostages, get a ceasefire. America, the European Union, everybody else will put tremendous pressure on Israel. You'll start to see the delegitimization campaign against Israel increase dramatically after the creation of a ceasefire. And then perhaps the pressure comes off of Iran, and they can restock and decide when they want to attack next. At the same time, when you look at what's going on inside Gaza today, what incentive does Hamas have to stop the war? At this point, how much more damage can Israel do, right? Yes, they can further degrade Hamas's military capabilities, and they continue to do that. We saw this report in the New York Times last week where they said that Israel can't make any more military gains. No, they can make more military gains. They can discover more tunnels. They can discover more weapons. They can take out the leadership of Hamas, potentially get Yahya Sinwar. But Hamas, the longer they drag this war out, the worse things can get for Israel in the long run, the more expensive things get. Nobody even talks about the financial costs of the war. Every single day that the war goes on, you're talking about hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. So that's something that Israel's going to begin to pay for next year. So why should Hamas release the hostages? What incentive do they really have? Their situation is bad. They can just drag this out as long as they want.
Hamas attacking, Hezbollah attacking, and yet the international community going after Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. The ICC prosecutor calling for an urgent ruling against Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. The ICC chief prosecutor this past week called on judges to urgently rule on his request for arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, over their involvement in prosecuting the war against Hamas, the Hamas terror group in Gaza. And then goes on, there's essentially a moral equivalency here between Netanyahu and Gallant, the leaders of Israel, the one and only democratic country here in the Middle East, and the Hamas terror organization, putting them both on the same playing field and calling essentially for them to hurry up and come to a conclusion. And, they wanted Netanyahu arrested. I mean, these people, they're the international legal arm of Hamas. That's what they're acting as, these people.
Karim Khan, so he said, well, we're not one-sided. We'll also put out an arrest warrant for Sinwar.
Sure.
But to put the head of a terrorist organization together with the democratically elected leaders of a country that did not violate the ceasefire agreement, responding to the most heinous terror massacre in the history of the modern state, it's absurd. And it's not just the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court. It's the International Court of Justice, which has been hearing a case as to whether Israel's committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip. And I would bet, by the way, that just statistically speaking, that there are more residents inside Gaza in 2024, at the end of 2024, than there were at the end of 2023. Okay, so the population of Gaza continues to go up even now. So
that's not a genocide,
right? It's not just the ICC, it's not just the ICJ. It is the other UN organizations like UNRWA, which has been perpetuating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for generations. It's UNICEF. It is the UNESCO, the cultural organization, which is classifying Jewish biblical holy sites as Palestinian heritage sites. It's the General Assembly. It's the Security Council, and it's also the parliaments in Europe. Throughout Europe, it's part of the Democratic Party, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and it's also the mainstream media. These are all parties that have linked up together to do the political bidding of Hamas and essentially of Iran.
Let's get to that. You mentioned the Democratic Party, the DNC. They held their convention there in Chicago over the weekend. And I'd like to know, some of the disturbing images I saw from outside the DNC, the burning of the Israeli flag by these masked anti-Israel activists, the burning of the Israeli flag and the American flag, by the way. Do you think that the Democratic Party, are they giving in to the progressives? You had Kamala Harris talking about the suffering on both sides, as if we talked about moral equivalency before. But before I get your answer, let's listen to some of the speech of Kamala Harris at the DNC as she talked about Israel and the Arabs in Gaza.
With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
So again, Harris saying she believes that the United States must stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. But then again, she focused on the desperate, hungry people in Gaza fleeing for safety over and over, the suffering. It's heartbreaking. Again, putting those on the same level there. I mean, what is going on with the Democratic Party? Are they giving in to these progressives? Is Harris going to be pro-Israel if she becomes the president? What's with this moral equivalency? A lot to digest here.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's separate the protesters outside the room from who was inside the room.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very important to focus on what's going on inside the room. Look, we've seen the Democratic Party and the current administration say over and over again that they're committed to the defense of Israel. And even as we had the convention, you have something like over half of the U.S. Navy stationed in the Middle East. You know, on April 13th, as we discussed before, when Iran sent 300 missiles and drones towards Israel, the United States was engaged and involved actively in defending the home front of Israel. And they've committed again that if Hezbollah will start attacking, if Iran will attack, they are committed to defending the home front of Israel. So they're not seeking hourly the destruction of the state of Israel. I want to make that clear. And sometimes maybe we are hypercritical of the Democratic Party. They're not out to destroy Israel. At the same time, there are people deep inside the upper levels of the security establishment in the administration that are Iranian supporters, that are Palestinian sympathizers, and they have a strong voice, and you don't see Palestinian sympathizers and Iranian supporters, in the upper echelons of the Republican Party. So there's this balance going on, and furthermore, as you get younger and younger in the Democratic Party, the favoritism toward the state of Israel continues to decline. So right now they're on this hedged point where they sort of want Israel to survive, but they also don't want Israel to win, right? They're trying to hold Israel back. They say, don't launch a ground invasion, don't go into Rafah. You see the report that's obviously a leak from the White House last week, as I just said before, about there's nothing more to gain. You need to do a ceasefire now. Don't escalate to attack Hezbollah. Don't respond to Iran. They don't want Israel to be destroyed, but they definitely are doing everything that they can not to permit Israel to win in a conclusive manner. And the problem with that is that if Israel would win in a conclusive manner, this would transform the Middle East. And it would transform the Middle East into a region of peace. And it would set up a situation in which Israel could normalize relations with the moderates in the region and just put the Middle East on a much stronger path toward prosperity and security for everybody. As long as you continue to strengthen the belligerent and malign actors in the region, you're going to continue to have war. And it's something that, unfortunately, I think that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party doesn't understand.
Yeah, and they certainly do understand it, though, in places like Saudi Arabia, where they're not willing to do any type of normalization deal when you have a weak administration in Washington. I really like, though, I like that senator, right, John Fetterman. You interviewed him when he was in Israel just several weeks ago. I mean, what a pleasant surprise that guy is in terms of coming to Israel's defense time and time again. I follow him on social media. I never expected it when he was running for his Senate seat. Never saw it coming. All of a sudden, he's a senator there, and time after time, the guy just stands up for Israel. He has such a moral compass. A very, very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, he understands it. He doesn't look smart. Like when you see a guy in a hooded sweatshirt with some tattoos and like one of these goatees.
Love the look.
Yeah, but I get it. But, he went to Harvard. He's a smart man. He had some kind of like a stroke. He's getting better. But, he was here and everything he said was on target. Everything that he said was correct. He gets it. He gets it in his head. He gets it in his heart. And I think that there's a lot of Democrats, Richie Torres, others, that really stand up to defend the state of Israel. When Netanyahu went to Congress, yes, there were many congressmen that boycotted the speech from the Democratic Party. There were others that sat there, stoically as the rest of the room was standing up over 50 times, giving standing ovations. But there were Democrats also standing up and giving standing ovations too. I think that there's still many, many Democrats that understand, hey, the state of Israel is an ally of the United States. The state of Israel gives a tremendous amount to the United States. There's shared values with the United States. But you have to worry about progressives that don't see a strong role for America as the policeman of the world, don't want America to be engaged. They don't want America to be exceptional or dominant on the world stage, and they don't want Israeli dominance in the Middle East.
Turning back to the DNC, I think one of the most emotional parts of the entire conference was when John and Rachel Polin, residents here in Jerusalem, originally from Chicago, came back to Chicago. Their son Hersh has been held in captivity as a hostage in Gaza for over 320 days. They were given a platform and they delivered an 8-minute speech, more or less. And it was just, it was a tearjerker. I mean, you could see the room was completely silent, everyone giving them their attention. And then they went into the chant of bring them home or bring them back, referring to the hostages, including Hersh, who's been held there. Let's take a look just at some of the highlights from their speech.
At this moment, 109 treasured human beings are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. They are Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. Among the hostages are 8 American citizens. One of those Americans is our only son. His name is Hersh. Hersh's left forearm, his dominant arm, was blown off before he was loaded onto a pickup truck and stolen from his life and me and John into Gaza. And that was 320 days ago.
This is a political convention. But needing our only son and all of the cherished hostages home is not a political issue. It is a humanitarian issue. There is a surplus of agony on all sides of the tragic conflict in the Middle East. In a competition of pain, there are no winners.
So there you have it. Again, really just, heartbreaking. And as we've said many times before, the families of the terrorists, those who have loved ones in Gaza, have the right and responsibility to do everything in their power in order to get their loved ones back. John Polin stating this is not a political issue, this is a humanitarian issue, and really just heartbreaking seeing them there, but then also inspiring to see an entire room of 20,000 people standing with the hostages and their families.
Well, the Polins and, they're a very special family. It's clear. Rachel, Hersh's mother, has really, stepped up in this time to just be a tireless activist for the return of the hostages, not shying away from any stage, including here, one of the biggest stages you could stand on at the Democratic National Convention. And again, a tearjerker. You just feel so terrible for the family and for the families of all the hostages. I think it was good that they went. I think it was good that the Democratic Party made that space, to bring the parents of hostages, especially because they were from Chicago. And as you mentioned, so I think it was an important moment. Of course, saying that it's not a political issue at a very political conference. And they had to be very careful in terms of what they said and what they didn't say, not really mentioning Israel so much, not talking about the Palestinians and how terrible Hamas is, not mentioning a lot of things that I think that they could have put inside the speech, but important nonetheless. And really, everybody needs to know that the reason why this war started is because Hamas crossed our border, killed 1,200 people, and took 250 people hostage. And it also makes you understand why the war has to continue. As long as the hostages are not returned home, I don't think Israel should stop this war. And so even though that wasn't stated explicitly in John Poland's message. I think that it was, spoken underneath, in between the words.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The three goals of Prime Minister Netanyahu: dismantling Hamas, bringing back the hostages, or actually having Hamas release the hostages, and making sure that Gaza is no longer a threat. Turning just here to the Middle East, you had the Houthis. I actually saw images this morning. The Houthis attacked a Greek tanker, I think 2 days ago. I saw images today, and the tanker is still on fire somewhere, I think in the Red Sea or whatnot. But what is interesting is that they attacked a Greek tanker, and then you have images of the Houthis, video of the Houthis chanting, "Death to America, death to Israel," mocking the United States, cursing the Jews, victory to Islam, as the fire rages on. Again, the Houthis sending a message that they want to be an active player here against Israel, against the Western world, against the United States. Another one of these Iranian proxies acting up. What was disappointing to me, actually, was the comments from Matthew Miller, spokesperson there for the U.S. State Department. His focus and his response wasn't on the fact that the Houthis attacked a Greek tanker and how bad it is and how we have to defend these vessels in the Red Sea, but he was talking about the environmental aspect of this, all the oil that could spill from this tanker. Again, obviously we care about the environment and the ecology and whatnot, but to focus on the oil and not focus on the fact that this tanker got blasted, not to focus on the fact that they were saying death to America. I think he kind of downplayed this attack, actually.
I was looking at this quote. The Houthis continued attacks threatened to spill 1 million barrels of oil into the Red Sea, an amount 4 times the size of the Exxon Valdez disaster. Through these attacks, the Houthis have made clear they're willing to destroy the fishing industry and regional ecosystems that Yemenis and other communities in the region rely on for their livelihoods, just as they've undermined the delivery of vital humanitarian aid to the region through their reckless attacks.
Yeah, what kind of response is that?
This is an Iranian proxy, okay? It's a proxy organization that not only has been sending ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones to Israel. Remember, it was just a few weeks ago that Yemen sent a drone that exploded just a couple blocks away from the U.S. Embassy branch office in Tel Aviv. And killed one Israeli. In that attack, they hit a kindergarten in Eilat earlier in the war. They're part of the ring of fire that Iran has built around the state of Israel from day one. They declared open war on Israel, and then more than just attacking Israel, they've been interrupting international shipping through the Suez Canal channel waterways in the Red Sea. This is one of the world's busiest commercial waterways. And they've interrupted traffic there, commercial traffic. That's a cause for war, right? Where the international community should have said, we are going to eliminate the Houthis unless they stop their attacks. And here we see that the Houthis continue to attack and without too much punishment. And so Matthew Miller is only talking about the ecological damage.
Yeah, that's disappointing, but their day will come sooner, hopefully rather than later. Just touching on a few other items here, and we can call this our anti-Semitism report. We're nearly out of time. A French synagogue attacked over the weekend. French police arrested a man suspected of trying to set a synagogue ablaze in the southern French city of La Grande Motte. That's how it's pronounced on Saturday. Luckily, this was before most of the worshipers arrived. He was arrested. This was an Islamic terrorist trying to kill Jews, trying to murder Jews. At the same time, here in Israel, Judea and Samaria, an Israeli lightly wounded during a car ramming attack outside the city of Ariel yesterday. Thank God, quick-acting IDF forces killed, I believe, 2 terrorists now, they're reporting. And again, an Israeli wounded lightly. At the same time, Arab terrorists detonating a roadside bomb, and this is very scary, outside an Israeli bus south of Bethlehem late last night. No injuries reported. So that's anti-Semitism also, whether it happens in France, whether it happens in Judea and Samaria. The goal here is to murder Jews. So it's happening both domestically and on foreign soil.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in France, France and the United Kingdom are the 3rd and 4th largest Jewish communities after Israel and the United States. The situation there has gotten much, much worse for Jews, and I think that there will actually be an influx of Jews moving to Israel in the coming years from these areas. You're already starting to see it. We have to watch very carefully what's going on in Judea and Samaria. people talk about what's going on in Israel and Gaza as being just the next round of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, an intractable conflict between two peoples over a tract of land. And while there has been terror in Judea and Samaria in particular, we haven't seen a full-scale uprising by Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, which is commonly known as the West Bank. In Jerusalem, we haven't seen the rioting of Arabs in mixed Arab-Israeli cities like Ramla and Lod like we saw in 2021, which indicates that the Palestinians are not necessarily trying to make war with Israel and that Israel's not making war with all Palestinians. Rather, this war is a war between Israel and Iran and its terror proxies, and Hamas has decided that it is a terror proxy of Iran. At the same time, the situation obviously very delicate in Judea and Samaria. Part of the reason why there hasn't been a mass uprising is because, unlike in the Gaza Strip where the IDF was not operating, the IDF has been operating almost nightly throughout Judea and Samaria, doing arrests, using intelligence to find where terror organizations are sprouting, and doing this sort of like a whack-a-mole strategy or mowing the grass strategy as something begins to develop, as you have intelligence that an attack is potentially being planned, that the IDF goes in and they take care of it in advance. So we're starting to see now a wave of attacks in Judea and Samaria. We have to watch carefully to see if this wave dies down. There's been nonstop waves over the last several years, or is this something that's going to escalate? Netanyahu has talked about this being a seven-front war, and so obviously we know about Hezbollah, we know about Hamas, we know about the Houthis, we know about Iran itself, we know about the other proxies in Syria and Iraq, but the Judea and Samaria front is one that Israel's been very active at defending, and hopefully it's not going to spiral out of control.
Yeah, that's a major point. Ever since Defensive Shield back in the early 2000s, when Israel went back and had the ability to go into these Arab villages on a nightly basis and make arrests, as opposed to what we saw in Gaza. We don't have boots on the ground. It's very hard to maintain intelligence. It's very hard to thwart these attacks. And the IDF, as we know, stops about 95%, if not more, of the attacks originating in Judea and Samaria. Let's hope that continues. That's all the time we have for today, folks, here on another edition of Jerusalem Minute. My name is Josh Haston with Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS News, coming to you from the heart of Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything he does. If you remember last week, we said hopefully we'll be alive and come back and be able to do the show again in case Iran strikes. Well, Hezbollah struck this past Sunday. Let's see what happens this week in terms of Iran. And please God, we'll be able to broadcast again next week. We'll still be here. And I'm confident. I'm confident in our army. I'm confident in our government. That we'll still be here, please God, next week. So everyone out there, continue to watch all the great programming on JNS TV and keep your finger on the pulse by going to jns.org for up-to-the-minute news on all the latest for Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world. Be safe, everyone. Have a great week.